Your perception is not reality, it's your interpretation of reality. And most of your suffering comes from confusing the two. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you why acknowledging that your perception might be wrong changes everything, and the three practices that will help you see situations clearly instead of through the filter of your assumptions, fears, and past conditioning. I used to think my perception was truth. If I saw something a certain way, that's how it was. If I felt hurt by someone's words, they meant to hurt me. If I believed a situation was unfair, it was unfair. And that rigidity made me miserable, because I was constantly reacting to my interpretations instead of responding to what was actually happening. I created conflict where there didn't need to be any. I suffered over things that weren't even real, just my perception of them. Then I learned the most liberating truth. There's what happens, and there's the story I tell myself about what happens. And those are two completely different things. When I started separating them, everything changed. I stopped taking things personally. I stopped jumping to conclusions. I stopped creating unnecessary drama. Because I realized my perception is just one angle, one perspective, and it's often wrong. Here's what we're covering. First, what perception actually is and why it's always filtered and incomplete. Second, the three perceptual traps that create the most suffering. And third, the three practices that will help you acknowledge your perceptions without being controlled by them so you can see clearly and respond wisely. Let's start with what perception is. It's how you interpret sensory input based on your beliefs, past experiences, and current emotional state. Two people can experience the exact same situation and perceive it completely differently. Because perception isn't about what's happening, it's about how your brain processes what's happening through your unique filters. Your childhood, your traumas, your fears, your desires, all of that shapes what you see. And what you see is never the full picture. It's just your angle. Here's the problem. Your brain doesn't present your perception as an interpretation. It presents it as fact. You don't think I'm interpreting this person's silence as rejection. You think this person is rejecting me. You don't think I'm perceiving this situation as unfair based on my expectations. You think this situation is unfair. Your brain skips the interpretation step and goes straight to conclusion. And you treat that conclusion as truth. But it's not truth. It's just your perception. And your perception is influenced by so many things you're not even aware of. Your mood, your stress level, your hunger, your sleep, your unresolved pain, all of it colors how you see things, which means your perception is unreliable. Not because you're crazy, but because you're human. And human perception is inherently biased and incomplete. The key to wisdom is acknowledging this, not as a weakness, but as a fact. When you can say, this is how I'm perceiving this situation, but I could be wrong, you open yourself to other possibilities. You soften your grip on your narrative. You become curious instead of defensive. And that curiosity is what allows you to see clearly, to respond wisely, to avoid unnecessary suffering. Now here are the three perceptual traps that create the most suffering. Trap 1. Assuming intent. Someone does something, you immediately assign meaning to it. They didn't text back, they don't care about me. They criticize me, they think I'm not good enough. They cancel plans, they don't value me. You take their action and create a story about why they did it, about what it means about you, and that story becomes your reality, even though you have no idea what their actual intent was. This is mind reading. You're assuming you know what's going on in someone else's head, but you don't, you can't, you're guessing. And usually you're guessing based on your fears, your insecurities, your past wounds, not based on what's actually true. Most of the time, people aren't thinking about you at all. They're dealing with their own stuff. But your perception makes it about you, and you suffer over a story you created. Trap 2. Filtering for threat. Your brain has negativity bias. It looks for danger, for what could go wrong, for signs that you're not safe. And that means you perceive threats that aren't there. Someone gives you feedback, you perceive attack. Someone disagrees with you, you perceive rejection. Someone succeeds, you perceive your own failure. You're filtering everything through the lens of threat. And that makes the world feel hostile even when it's neutral. This creates constant stress. Because your perception is always finding problems, always seeing the worst, always preparing for disaster, you can't relax, you can't trust, you can't see the good. because your filter only lets in the negative, and you end up living in a reality that's much darker than the actual reality around you. Trap 3. Confusing your feelings with facts. You feel anxious, so you perceive the situation as dangerous. You feel insecure, so you perceive others as judging you. You feel unworthy, so you perceive rejection everywhere. Your emotional state becomes your lens, and everything you see is colored by how you feel. But feelings aren't facts. Just because you feel something doesn't make it true. You can feel rejected and not actually be rejected. You can feel unsafe and actually be completely safe. This is the most common trap. People don't realize how much their internal state shapes their external perception. When you're in a good mood, everything seems fine. When you're in a bad mood, everything seems wrong. Same situation, different perception. And if you don't acknowledge that your feelings are influencing your perception, you'll treat your perception as objective truth, and you'll make decisions based on feelings, not facts. Now here's how to acknowledge your perceptions without being controlled by them. These practices create space between what happens and what you think it means. Practice number 1. Name the perception explicitly. Instead of saying, "they're ignoring me," say, "I'm perceiving that they're ignoring me." Instead of "this is unfair," say, "I perceive this as unfair." You're making your perception visible. You're acknowledging that it's an interpretation, not a fact. And that simple shift creates space. Space to question, space to consider other angles, space to realize you might be wrong. This practice sounds simple, but it's revolutionary. Because the moment you name your perception as a perception, you're no longer fused with it. You can step back and examine it. You can ask, is this true, or is this my interpretation? Am I seeing clearly, or am I filtering through my fears? And that examination is what allows you to see more accurately. Do this with every strong reaction. If you're upset, angry, hurt, pause. Name what you're perceiving. I'm perceiving disrespect. I'm perceiving rejection. I'm perceiving failure. And then ask, is that definitely what's happening, or is that how I'm interpreting what's happening? Usually, it's the latter. And that awareness alone softens the reaction. Practice number 2. Seek other perspectives. Your perception is one angle, but there are always multiple angles. So before you solidify your perception as truth, seek other perspectives. Ask yourself, how else could this situation be interpreted? What might the other person be thinking or feeling? What am I not seeing? You're actively challenging your default perception, expanding your view, considering possibilities you hadn't thought of. You can also ask others, this is how I'm seeing this situation, how do you see it? And be genuinely open to hearing something different, not to prove you're right, but to see more completely, because other people have different filters, different experiences, and they might see something you're missing. And when you combine multiple perspectives, you get closer to what's actually true, not your truth, not their truth, just truth. This practice requires humility, because it requires admitting you might be wrong, that your perception might be incomplete or biased. But that humility is strength, it's wisdom, and it's what allows you to learn and grow instead of staying stuck in your limited view. Practice number 3. Check the facts before reacting. This is the most practical. Before you react to your perception, check the facts, not your interpretation, the actual observable facts. Someone didn't text back, that's a fact. They don't care about you, that's interpretation. Someone gave you critical feedback, that's a fact. They think you're incompetent, that's interpretation. Strip away the story and look at what actually happened. Just the behavior, just the words, just the situation, without your spin on it. Then, if you need to respond, respond to the facts, not to your interpretation. You might say, I noticed you didn't respond to my text. Is everything okay? Instead of, you're ignoring me. You're addressing what actually happened without adding the meaning you assigned to it. And that opens conversation instead of creating conflict. Because you're not attacking based on your perception. You're curious about what's actually true. This practice alone will save you from so much unnecessary suffering. Because most of the time, what you perceived isn't what actually happened. And when you check the facts first, you realize there's nothing to be upset about. There's no threat, there's no rejection, there's just a situation, and you can respond to it clearly instead of reactively. Here's what I want you to understand. Your perception is powerful. It shapes your experience. but it's not objective. It's filtered by everything you've been through. And when you acknowledge that, you free yourself. You stop being a prisoner of your interpretations. You start seeing more clearly, responding more wisely, creating less suffering for yourself and others. We covered what perception is, your filtered interpretation of reality. We identified 3 traps: assuming intent, filtering for threat, confusing feelings with facts. And we walked through 3 practices: name the perception explicitly, seek other perspectives, check the facts before reacting. This is the path to clarity. Not convincing yourself your perception is always right, but acknowledging it might be wrong, being willing to question it, being open to seeing differently. And from that openness, wisdom emerges, compassion emerges, peace emerges. So here's your practice. The next time you have a strong reaction, pause, name your perception. I'm perceiving this as, then ask, what else could this mean? Then check, what are the actual facts? You're training yourself to see clearly instead of through the distortion of your filters. Let me know in the comments, what perception do you need to question? What story are you telling yourself that might not be true? You're not your perceptions. You're the awareness that can observe them. And from that awareness, you can choose which perceptions to believe and which to release. Welcome to Clear Seeing. This is where freedom lives.